Hi, everybody, and welcome to Workshop 5. And today we're going to talk about interview guests on your show, the right way to invite them, the right way to prepare them, and the right way to prepare yourself to do interviews during your audio show. I'm going to hit my screen share and get my presentation up here. Without it, I am lost. Okay, audio show workshop 5 techniques for conducting on air interviews. So, interviews are the meat of nonfiction shows, okay? Um, while the bulk of your show is going to be focused on you talking directly to your audience to share your philosophies about your chosen subject, interviews are often critical parts of 20 to 30-minute nonfiction shows. They break up the monotony of just having one voice in your show, which is really critical for an audio show. You can, in a video show, you can do all kinds of things, visually that you can't do with an audio show. So one way to really make your show dynamic is to have other people talking during the show, providing information. Um, if you're having experts back up the data, or personal story givers providing emotional moments. You can even stir the pot by having conflicting viewpoints demonstrated by multiple guests, whatever you want to do there. But there are techniques required. So interviews can provide clarity, depth, and context that won't happen just by you talking throughout your show alone. And having guests appear on your show is a wonderful option. But everything from first contact and invitations, the legal aspects, and the technical methodology of recording a guest to our post production team's high standards of excellence all take some legitimate techniques. Today, we're going to discuss those subjects so you can plan your interviews and ensure that everything goes well during the process. So, first, we need to identify the guests you want. Naturally, you need to figure out who you want on your show. Are you going to bring in experts in your field? Are you more interested in sharing personal or professional stories that rouse emotion? Do you want one or multiple guests per episode? It's impossible to figure out who you need without knowing what your episodes are going to be about. So to make a proper guest list, you'll first need to create a synopsis of each episode of your season. And that doesn't need to be that detailed, one paragraph on each for yourself, like, okay, this is the main subject of this episode. Who's the right guest, or who are the right guests for me to have? um Creators who are not going to have guests on the show can wait until phase 2 of the program to outline the entire season, but those who want guests can't wait that long, and here's why: people are often slow to get back. That's because it's imperative that you invite people to be guests on your show sooner than later. There are a lot of logistics to work out. People are busy. While they are often flattered to be asked to be a guest, they may not have immediate availability on their calendar. Sometimes it takes some people weeks or even months to respond. Sometimes they want to learn more about you and what your show is about before they will commit. So, step one, creating a comprehensive list. You should create a list of potential guests and replacements for those guests should the first one say no for any reason. Best way to do this is by episode. Let's say you decide to have two experts with different opinions on every episode. Here's how you would frame that list. So you see on the left side, episode 1, the pilot, guest 1A, I want Steven Spielberg, and guest 1B, Judy Blue Eyes, which is actually a song. Well, Crosby's still snatching young, but I just put that. Harrison Ford would be my replacement for Steven Spielberg, or actually would be my primary second guest, right? But if Harrison Ford can't make it, I want Kermit the Frog to be there. So you know, again, on episode 2, okay, I put water treatment. That reminds me, okay, we're going to talk about, you know, things dealing with water treatment in episode 2. So my guest 1A, Dr. Rudy Toot Fruity. My guest 1B, Dr. Frankenstein. Dr. Frankenstein is my replacement guest if Rudy Toot Fruity is not around. And then guest 2A, Mrs. Nosferatu, or if that vampire can't make it, gets to be Mr. Cheetos Doritos, one of my favorite people. Okay. Um, Despite my silliness in making these lists, you can see that this gives me like basically these are who I'm going to invite, but I'm not going to invite the B people right away. These are my alternates. So, you know, I'm only going to invite, in this case, Judy Blue Eyes if Steven Spielberg says no, right? So that's what you want to do is make sure that you know have though a backup so that you're not scrambling. Like if Steven Spielberg says no, you're like, now what am I going to do? You're like, okay, you know what you're going to do.
Get Judy Blue Eyes.
That's right. So for now, you're only going to invite the 8 people on your list, the ones you hope to have on the show. The B list that you will reach out to if the A's say no. There's no reason to reach out to them until you need a replacement. It's actually really bad protocol to invite someone. Would you like to be a guest on my show? Yes, I would. Oh, sorry, I don't need you. You know, don't do that. You know, wait until the A's say no to invite the B's. Your initial contact is going to be different during the invitation if you know the person or if this is a cold contact. I have created already in the worksheets everything you need in terms of I've written out some good templates for you to use. So you don't have to think about this too much. But if you know people already, you can create a nice form letter explaining the premise of the show and why you want them to appear on it. If it's cold contact, yeah, you might have to do a bit more, such as providing a free copy of your ebook and explaining exactly why you want them to appear on the show. Let them know they aren't going to be surprised. This is very important. In either case, you can let them know that you're going to provide them with all the questions you intend to ask long before the interview and that there will be no surprises involved. This is going to put them at ease. And when you do provide them with your questions, they're going to be better prepared to do an excellent interview. This is standard procedure and the right way to go about it. So we're going to have, Junetsu is here. Let's just welcome him in for a minute. Hi, Junetsu. We're already in progress, so you'll be able to see the first few slides during the recording. I'm just going to keep going. You haven't missed too much. So,
Okay.
so step 3, obviously you missed step 1 and 2. You'll get those on the video recording. Step 3, interview follow-up packet. So when an interview subject initially says yes, you're going to send them a packet that's going to contain an introduction letter, your intended questions potentially, and instructions that will clarify aspects of the interview. I've actually created 2 different follow-up packages, one where you provide the questions right away, one where you won't. And you may want to develop your season a little further. If you have a guest for episode 5 or 6, you may want to follow up with them, but wait until you develop your scripts for those episodes a little more before you actually send them questions. So you're probably only going to follow up immediately and do your intended questions for people who are going to be guests of your pilot episode here in phase 1. And we'll send people a follow-up packet that starts getting them into the mode without giving them the questions yet. And all of that is framed in the materials that I have in the worksheets. So you'll see all of that later today. When you get closer to the interview, you're also going to provide them with an interview consent form. So I'm going to go over all these things now individually. Your intended questions for both legal and quality control reasons, it's imperative that you send them every question you intend to ask them at least a few days before the interview, but weeks or even months would be much better. This is going to allow them to vet the questions and collaborate with you to eliminate any that are uncomfortable or will steer into questionable legal ground or are redundant and can be combined. They may also want you to ask them about something that you didn't, and you can add a question or two based on their collaboration. Let them nix any question. Your guest should be allowed to negate any question that you provide, and you should not be put off by it. If a question or series of questions is at the heart of the interview and they won't answer them, maybe this isn't the right guest and you need to look elsewhere. But don't try and force your guests into a corner. That's the wrong way to go about it. Allow them to erase any question on the list. You may still get great material for your show, even unexpected material. You can then ask the central questions you want to somebody else. The other reason we give our guests the full question list well ahead of time is so they can provide us with great answers. Interview subjects may need to do research so their answers are succinct and accurate. Guests have the right to make sure they aren't made to look like a fool in front of your audience. Give them time to do so. They will appreciate it, and the interviews will become stress-free. So instructions. A new worksheet's going to be added to your follows at the conclusion of this workshop. Actually, 3. It turned out to be 3 new worksheets. But one of them, the third one, is the kind of instructions that you should provide to your interviewees. There's things to talk about in terms of the microphone, and essentially you should consider how long you want the interview to be and how many questions you're going to ask during it. That's going to give you an average time limit for each answer, right? So you want them to keep their answers tight. It's okay for the interviewees to go slightly long as you'll pare their answers down with them during the process. I'm going to talk about that later. But if they only have 2 minutes to answer a question, you don't want them going 6 or 7, right? By warning them of how long they have approximately, it's going to help them frame answers that are short and tight ahead of time. Work with your producer on the questions. You want your interviews to be short and tight, but also informative or emotional. You need to make an impact on your audience either by enlightening them with information or convincing them with a personal story. So your question should be pointed towards attaining the goal. Make sure that you're on track and let your producer help you by examining your questions before you send them to your interviewee. So let me talk about the interview consent form for a minute. This is an important document that's already found in your creative materials folder. Once they sign it, they are consenting to the interview being placed in your show. If they refuse to sign it, it's a red flag that they might back out even after you recorded the interview and post-production edited it. And if they don't sign it, they have the legal right to pull their interview. So you're entering dangerous waters if you entertain thoughts of ignoring this step. Your interviewees need a microphone. So now we get to the technical side of things. You can't help what microphone your interviewees have, but you best warn them that they'll need one to do the interview, right? Unless they're local and they can come to you and you can share a microphone, or if you have to, then this can become tricky. Most people don't just have a mic lying around, and you are not going to record this on Skype or Zoom, so this will need to be worked out. You can ask to test their equipment early. They can use a normal computer microphone in most cases. If you're concerned about this, you should book a practice session with them to test their equipment. They shouldn't be put off by that. After all, if their mic doesn't work during the actual interview date, or it all comes out sounding horrible and unusable, they're going to be just as upset as you. And they may not come back to do the whole thing again, right? So let's make sure that we get, a mic test done on them. So now we're going to talk about the professional interview program. On the worksheet already in your folder, recording interviews, do's and don'ts, it's in your folder. A few professional interview programs are mentioned. There are other ones out there. You're free to use whichever ones you feel most comfortable with. You should try them out, see what you like best, what's easiest for you to use. It's really imperative that you do all your interviews with one of these to improve the sound quality on both sides of the recording. And that's why they can use a microphone like I've got right now, which I would never use for a professional interview normally. But if you're filtering it through one of these professional interview programs, it will make the sound quality fine for for the most part. There are monthly fees for interview programs. Most interview programs do have a small monthly fee of $10 to $30 for a subscription. It behooves you to try and schedule a lot of your interviews close together and pay for the subscription during months when you're having them. So this should not be a huge cost, but you should be aware that it will not be free to use most of those programs. This is what I said at the beginning of the program. That's why I wanted you guys to raise that additional $500 where you're giving us 3,500 for the pilot. You're keeping 500 for yourselves for ancillary costs like your own microphone and like these interview programs. That's what part of that's for. Don't be cheap. I discussed this because I want you to be aware of the costs and to prepare to pay for them. There are places you might be able to cut some financial corners in the program. A great interview recording program isn't one of them. You don't want to do an entire interview and then scrap it because the sound quality doesn't meet our production standards. Sorry about the typo. That didn't meet my production standards. Okay, but I fix it. Do some test interviews. So you don't want your first real interview to be the first time you ever use the interview program. You want to work out the technical kinks long before you're doing the real thing. You can do this with your producer. You can do this with a family member or friend or colleague. Become a master of the interview program you're going to use so that your first real interview goes smooth as silk. Don't try and figure out the interview program during your first actual interview. It's unprofessional. You're playing with fire. If something goes wrong, you hit the wrong button, you didn't record the interview, or something comes out weird or whatever, that's on you, and your guest is not going to be amused by that, right? It's not a good look. Always record using WAV files. This is a requirement from our post-production team. Fortunately, WAV is a standard format, so all the usual interview recording companies will allow you to use it. Please remember to do so. Our post-production team will only accept files using WAV format for the show. Very important. Best practices for interview takes. So a take is the entire interview from start to finish. That's one take. All right. So it might be best to allow your interviewee. By the way, I need to stop for a second. Do you guys hear like loud booming sounds on the other side of? Okay, so it's not going through my microphone. If that does end up on the recording, they're working on the roof on the building next door to me. It's like a whole giant crew of like 20 people tearing off the roof and repairing the roof. So sorry about that if any loud booms come through. So anyway, it might be best to allow your interviewee to warm up by answering your questions in a slightly loose fashion for the first take. If they came in properly prepared, then you both know what they're going to talk about. After the first run through of the entire interview, take a break, listen to their answers, and then collaborate with them. Tell them what parts of it were the best. Then you can do a second run through of the interview with them. This time, your interviewees will keep it tight and only answer using that best material. This is common practice method of doing interviews, so they come out sounding fantastic. It'll sound natural, like this was the first take, right? But it's not. They've been through it. They've run through it, and they know what they're going to say. You know what they're going to say. All the hemming and hawing that'll come out in the first. I do a lot of that uhs and ums and things like that. But a lot of that will be eliminated, and any clutter where they drifted for a minute, or they didn't do they just went off on a tangent or whatever. You get rid of that stuff and you say, this is I love this material. Let's just talk about that. Let's use that. And make sure they know ahead of time that this is how it's going to run. Again, I have all of this in the worksheet materials, but obviously running through the entire interview multiple times is a time-consuming adventure. It could be a 3 to 4 hour process. Make sure your guest knows exactly what you're planning to do ahead of time and if they're on board. If they think they're coming over for an hour, they're like, yeah, this is going to take 4 hours. Like, they will not be happy. You don't want grumpy guests. You don't want to surprise them with doing multiple takes. You can usually convince them when you let them know how great the interview will end up as a result of doing it this way. They're also going to want to make the best impression as a permanent guest on your show. We need an accurate transcript. Oh, one last thing I'm going to say about this. And you can ask your guests, they can do this in one session or two, right? So you could do the first interview with them and then find the best material and schedule the second run with them for them to come back and do the second run. So it's all about, you and your rapport with the guest or their schedule. They may only have one day, like, I can do it on this day, and then I'm on a plane to Brazil for 3 months. Like, so understand their calendar, understand what's comfortable for them. They might be like, great, I can do 2, 90-minute sessions. That's comfortable for me. You may actually agree with them to do it in one session, but after the first run through, you guys might be exhausted and you're like, you know what? We want this to sound fresh. We want to sound lively and excited. Let's do the second take, on a different day. They might be more than happy to agree to it after an exhaustive first run. So, there's that option for you. So we need an accurate transcription. This is actually every segment of your show. Post-production editor needs to see that. Part of your responsibility as a show creator will be to create a transcription of every segment of your show, interviews included. Your post-production editor needs to know what they are listening to. So don't forget, once you finalize your interview, to also create a transcription of it. So our post-production team has everything they need. You'll find that some of the professional interview programs actually do create a transcription. So that's a nice feature. But depending on what you leave in or out, like, you might want some of the questions to be eliminated if you go over the time or whatever. And so just make sure you're working with your post-production editor to have a completely 100% accurate transcription. Every word needs to be correct on your transcription. And that is your responsibility as a show creator. Okay. 3 worksheets, as I mentioned. Your producer is going to provide you with 3 worksheets to follow up this workshop so you have the right materials to first invite guests, then follow up with them, and then finalize everything. Have fun working on these exercises and using the resources provided to prepare both yourself and your guests for amazing interviews. We're going to have a nice Q&A session in a minute. Workshop 6, we're going to get into the writing process. Our next workshop is going to be on the 3 draft writing process in the creative process. So I'm looking forward to discussing this with you at length. We're getting into my personal forte as a professional fiction writer. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to throw it to you guys. Let's talk about interview subjects, anything regarding whether it's the technical stuff or the guests themselves, or anything you want to talk about on this subject, we're open for business.
So I got a question for you.
Go ahead, Welby.
So I'm doing a 20-minute show. So
Yes.
is there a particular number of questions you think I should prepare for?
So this really matters. A couple questions matter here. How many guests are you going to have? One or two?
Mhm.
How many, where in the show is it going to be? Is it going to be early? Is it going to be late? Are you going to, like talk about your subject and give a lot of empirical data first and then have the guest on to back up that data? So there isn't a one, like I can say, here's what you want to do. Have exactly 6 minutes and 12 seconds and that'll be perfect. Like there's no sweet spot. The sweet spot is going to be what really works for the show that you're building. And this is where each of you are going to get into creative, collaborative discussions with your producer. And you're really going to really kind of think about, okay, how many segments am I going to have in my show? What are those segments going to be about? And how much of the focus do I want to put on my guest? How much of the focus do I want to keep on myself? Do I have a personal story I want to share during this episode, or do I have a lot of data and facts that I want to relate from my book, or from other stuff that I've researched since? Do I want to update? Hey, in my book I talked about this, but in the year since I published it, new data has come out and I want to talk about. And maybe you have a guest that talks about the new stuff, or maybe you have a guest that has a personal story. You have to decide how to maximize the effect of your guest. The bottom line here, because it's a great question, Welby, and the bottom line is impact. It's all about the impact of your guest. If you have a very prominent guest, like if I did get Steven Spielberg on my show, and I had a 20-minute show, hell, it's Steven Spielberg. Like, why am I going to downgrade him? Give him 15 minutes out of the 20 minutes of my show. It's Steven Spielberg, Um, but if Steven Spielberg couldn't come up, and I just had Judy Blue Eyes, who was like an independent director, to talk about, directing and all of that, that might be, an 8-minute interview or whatever, you know what I mean? Or it might even just be a 6-minute interview. It depends on what I need. What do you need? When you invite a guest, what you should really be asking yourself is, why am I inviting this guest? What do I need from this guest that's going to make this show imminently listenable to for my audience? What does this guest provide? The bang for the bucks here is this. Is it more bang for my bucks to keep this interview short and sweet and just get that 3-minute personal story, that if I try and make it 6 minutes, we're going to have just a lot of like less interesting stuff in there? But if I keep it really tight, like, tell me about this story, and the story is 3 minutes long, and that's the whole story, great. That's a 3-minute interview. Maybe you get 2 other guests with 3-minute interviews, and you have 9 minutes of interviews, and you spread them throughout the show. So it's really all about the impact that particular guest is going to make within the context of the entirety of your 20-minute episode. How does having that guest attract listeners? How does having that guest either prove your point, or if you're going to have guests that have conflicting points of view, how does that play into, your stance? Or if you're not taking a stance, you're going, hey, these are 2 different points of view on the subject. And, I want to point them both out because, both of these people are experts and both of them have potentially valid points of view. And you should listen to this and decide for yourself, that's a documentary style of doing a show, right? Or you may be very opinionated and it's all about your slant. And then you want guests that back up your slant, right? You know, so if you spend like 10 minutes, like, this is how I feel about a subject, and you have a guest that completely disagrees with your slant, and doesn't back up your data and does the exact opposite or whatever, like that's, that could work too. You go, that's what I feel, but I have someone who feels differently, and let's talk to this person. So again, it's about one, the entertainment value, the education value, the impact of your show. Because even if your show is extremely informative, if it's dry and dull, no one's going to listen to your whole season. They're not coming back for season 2. So how are we making this fun for people to listen to, dynamic, but also either educational or interesting, or depending on what your show is about, and so that's really, did that do you feel like that covered that answer? It was
Yeah.
broader than I know you wanted, but
Yeah, I get it. I guess I was looking at it because it's gonna be 20 minutes. So in that 20 minutes, gonna be an introduction and a closing with an ad maybe in between at that point. That's why I was asking.
So if you talk about, that's why we do a segment by segment outline. That's exactly precisely why we go, okay, opening credits 90 seconds typically, closing credits also 90 seconds. That's why I talked about there's 3 minutes in every episode that you're not using because they're for opening and closing. Okay? So now if you're going to have two advertisements, 20 seconds each, that's 40 seconds, right? And those are 4 different segments, right? So now you're going to have your introduction segment. Hey, in this episode, I'm going to talk about such and such or whatever, right? Right after, this word from our sponsor, right? Boom, first ad. And then you come back and whether your first segment is you talking or it's like, hey, I brought this guest on, let's hear this interview, you're going to set it up and then have it. It's up to you. It's what you really want is, and again, this is where your producer comes in because you're all new to making shows, but your producers are very creative and have helped build this kind of material again and again. That's why Michelle and Stephanie are so key to what we do. When you get into building the creative aspects of your show, you've got some experts to help you in your weekly meeting, like, okay, these are some pieces that I want to put together, and use your producer and collaborate. I'm always happy to come in and lend an opinion also, but lean on your producer to really kind of find the format, because once you find a format, by the way, you may want to keep it for every episode.
Right.
You might be like, wow, this format is going to work for my show, and I'm going to do this in this exact order. When you look at a lot of TV shows, especially game shows and reality TV shows like Top Chef or Survivor or whatever, the reason why they've survived for so long is because they have a format. In segment 1, we're doing this. In segment 2, we're doing this. With Top Chef, like, they come out, they do like, okay, we find out what the initial quick challenge is. Now we're at Whole Foods. We're getting the ingredients for the quick challenge. Now we're making the quick challenge. Good. The winner and the, 3 guys that were great. 3 guys that didn't do so great. Oh, the prize. Okay. Boom. Commercial, and now we come back and it's on to the big team challenge, whatever the team challenge is. People who are, segment interviews with people who are concerned about being eliminated. People who have been doing great, who are like, this is right in my forte. I make steaks. I have a steak restaurant. We're doing steak. Boom. And then, you know, they're setting up the drama, they're setting up conflicts. But if you watch 20 episodes of Top Chef in a row and you just pull back and you take a notebook and you go, segment 1, they did this. Segment, you're gonna be like, every episode's the same. But that's called a format. But every episode isn't the same, because within that format, they're focusing on different contestants. They have different challenges. They have different, you know, things that happen, you know, conflicts that arise between competitors over the course of the season. They start highlighting. Obviously, if someone gets eliminated, they're out, so they have to focus on someone else. So think about that with your show. Like, is there a format? And that will help you build every episode. And you'll know, okay, I'm doing 8-minute interviews with one guest every episode. And that guest is, you know, I'm going to switch off on odd number episodes. I'm going to do an expert. On even number episodes, I'm going to do a compelling, moving story. Boom, you're done. You're doing 10 episodes of a 20-minute show, 5 experts, 5 compelling stories. So you make a list of, you know, 10 experts, your A list, your B list, 10 compelling stories, your A list, your B list, and that's it. And you know who to invite. So, you know, yeah, understanding your show is really crucial to understanding who you want on your show. It's hard to just invite people. What you really shouldn't do is, like, I want these guests on my show and try to build episodes around them, unless they're really compelling. Again, I could build a whole episode around Harrison Ford or Steven Spielberg. Could I build a whole episode around an indie filmmaker on an audio show? With a video show, I could follow them around. We could go to their set. We could see how they get props and things, you know, which is different than how Disney can just make them, you know, whatever. But how does, like, an indie filmmaker in New York City, you know, with a $3,000 budget to make their whole film, get all the props and costumes and makeup and lighting stuff? That might make for a great episode, and verbally it might make for a great episode. How do I break that up? How do I make that into interesting dynamic segments? So, you know, think about your show and how, you know, have fun with this. Like, this is the fun part. This is the creative part where we're like, yeah, you know, I'm incorporating guests into my show. You know, we got to start building out the show. And that's, you should, if you're not having immense fun with that, what are we doing here? You know, so next question.
I'm wondering maybe if,
Oh,
I'm sorry, did somebody else?
you know what? I'll do Colette first and
Fine,
then
it's fine.
Shinetsu.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Shinetsu.
Yeah.
That's okay.
So, just wondering, you know, like, if I'm going to be doing my interviews with the schools and people there, I should probably bring my equipment over there, you think, maybe, and do it at the school, or the same if I'm working with a theater?
So one thing about schools that's nice is they usually have a room that's soundproof.
Yeah.
I want to do your whole show there if they're sponsoring it. You know, it might be better than your home or office. Especially if they have a music department or they have, you know, their own, like, AV department or whatever. They might have a sound booth. Music departments, they usually do, you
Mhm.
know. Theatrical departments, they might. So that's going, you want to make it as easy for your guests as possible. And the other thing is, if you're, in your case, if you're interviewing, we'll see about the legality about interviewing students down the line, but if you're interviewing teachers, administrators, you know, guidance counselors, you know, principals, whatever, adults that can just sign the waiver form, having it set up there at the school so that these people don't have to, you know, like, come to your home or have to do an online interview, would be wonderful.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm gonna do that. And then the same thing, if the theater does go to, that might be better. I'm sure they have more, better sound and everything that,
Maybe. Here's the problem with a live theater. A live theater has an acoustic so that everything is supposed to echo outward.
Mhm,
So sometimes when you use a microphone and it's supposed to record inward,
mhm,
you get echo
mm,
in a theater with
mm,
acoustics, especially if they do opera and things like that. You know what I mean? So
mhm,
it's, you know, the acoustics might be spectacular for a
mhm,
live show
mhm.
and might be horrible for your recording.
Yeah, or they might have areas where, they would be able to have that set. I don't know. I don't know enough yet, but
Yeah, maybe,
we'll see.
possibly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, but think about that.
Mhm,
Because the acoustics of a live theater are meant for live performances, and they're meant to so that someone can project their voice on the stage, and people in the back row and the upstairs area will still be able to hear them while they're on stage. So the acoustics of a live theater and the acoustics that you need for your show, for studio shows, might be very, very, they might be the opposite of each other. Be careful. Shunetsu, how are you? What's your question, sir?
Yeah, I'm fine. Thanks so much. So I basically wanted to know, with some of the interviews, would you advise maybe to have something that's more impromptu, that won't be as scripted, or does it always have to
No,
be?
that's the worst
Oh,
thing to do possible. First of all, you're
okay,
opening yourself up to lawsuits. You're also opening yourself up to them absolutely pulling out, like storming out of the room. If you ask them something, you must prepare them ahead of time. Also,
okay,
what if you want to ask them a technical question and they're an expert, but they didn't know you were going to ask them about that? So they didn't come as prepared for that question as you would like. So
okay,
it's just a bad idea to do impromptu interviews. People are doing
okay,
comedy shows and you want that natural reaction or whatever, or people that do those shock value talk shows or whatever, they're surprising people, right?
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, you don't want that at all. You want the opposite. You want them to have the questions at, at the worst weeks ahead of time, possibly months ahead of time. You want them to go, I'm not, this makes me uncomfortable. Or, you know, they may go, I'll answer this. And they talk about it. And you're like, oh, no, we can't use that. We will get,
because it's too
that's a
much. Yeah,
defamation
absolutely.
lawsuit, or
Yeah,
because what if you're interviewing someone and you think it's tell me about your experiences at so and so pharmaceutical company. They're like, oh, it was the worst. My manager
and
Jordy, he was scum, and you're like, oh no,
okay, okay, okay.
you know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like you can't,
yeah.
like
No,
what
I
are you gonna
understand. I
do?
understand.
You need
Yeah.
to control everything. The best
Okay.
interviews are controlled interviews for this format. And you can't
Okay.
control people live. What you can control is if you give them the questions, they agree to answer those questions, and what their answers are pretty much going to be going in because they give you a little
Okay.
synopsis of how they want to answer it.
Okay.
That's I understand the idea of going somewhere and it's has that um impromptu feel that, but
Almost
man,
authentic, sort of. Yeah, I
yeah,
understand. Yeah.
trust me, you can still get that authenticity from people when you're doing an interview that's a little bit rehearsed, because they're still going to be naturally speaking on the subject, or they're still going to be telling you their personal story, and they may get very emotional every time they tell it, right? and
Absolutely.
and so um it's a great question, no doubt, but you're setting yourself up for lots of unusable material, and we
Okay.
can't really afford that. And the other problem is that it becomes a real issue with post-production where what we would like, the best thing for us on our end is if you can give us that second take of the interview and you do it all in one and it just comes out and we don't have to stop and start or cut anything. We just have that
Yes.
whole interview as one piece, one segment, and the post-production team can just put that in your show. Every time they
Okay.
have to cut something and and paste together things, it's hours of man hours on their
Yeah.
end and becomes much
Okay.
more expensive.
Yeah.
So basically when people do a lot of those live impromptu interviews, they're expecting to get certain unusable amounts of material and they're expecting to either edit
Yeah.
that heavily in post production or they want that impromptu. That's the nature of the show, that we're going live. We're
Absolutely.
gonna, and you see that in documentaries sometimes with controversial documentarians who are like, I'm ringing the doorbell of this guy. He doesn't know I'm here. We're gonna just put the cameras in his face and ask him a controversial question and let's see what happens. Right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know what? Um, you're not at a level where you can absorb a lawsuit. And
Yeah.
frankly, our company
Right
is
now, obviously, no, that's
so
yeah.
we want to avoid all of that. And again, you don't know if someone's going to say something inflammatory. I have a whole list in these worksheets of things you want to avoid. And so if someone turns out to have a toxic personality and maybe they're a little racist or misogynist or whatever it is,
Yeah.
like you want to know that ahead of time. Like, I'm going to answer it this way, and you're like, okay, maybe we're not going to use that, and here's why. Um and you can collaborate with them and go, can we just, instead of phrasing it that way, can we maybe change this up a little bit so that it doesn't get us into any legal trouble, or whatever, or the production company outright refuses to, because we have, as the director of the program, I have the right to say we're not using that interview for this reason. Our company will get into a lot of
Absolutely.
trouble.
No, that's
We would be
understandable.
added to the lawsuit, and we're not going to do that. So again, great question, but we want to not do impromptus. It's much better to prepare everyone so they understand what questions are going to be asked for their comfort level, and so that they don't try and pull the interview after you've already done it, but
Absolutely.
also so that they're prepared to answer it in a way that gives you the best information or the best version of the story.
As well as a comfortability sort of a cushion,
That's
right?
right.
So,
Yeah,
okay.
very right. Very right.
Okay.
Great
Okay.
question. Thank you for it. Anyone else with another one? It's pretty straightforward, right? We're going to figure out what our format is. We're going to figure out who fits into that format. We're going to invite them. We're going to prep them, and then we're going to interview them. And then post-production will take it and incorporate it into our show. It's not rocket science, but like I said at the top, there's definite technique to every aspect of this, and we want to learn those techniques. We want to employ those techniques, and you're all going to get very good at this and become experts at this very quickly. Because it, like I said, it's not rocket science. It's just a matter of taking everything in the worksheets and the other information that we have, working with your producer to get the best form letters and to phrase the best questions, and and then you'll end up with spectacular interviews that are going to really pop in your show. So this has been Workshop 5, and we did it again. We got it in 50 minutes. That's what we're looking for. So thanks so much, everybody. Great questions in the Q&A session this time. I appreciate it. And your producer should have all 3 of those worksheets in your folders, your exercises folders, later today or by tomorrow morning at latest. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your afternoon. And as always, I'm around if you have any other questions later.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you. You guys have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.